Perfect. So you should see my screen now. Okay. This is a very, very simple multi-objective feature selection process. Here, I have a breakpoint set where I'm going to show my initial training data. We'll load it up here for a second. I'll hit the Run button. And you can see this looks very similar to what the PowerPoint looked before. I have my historical data, which is either people who have won, clients we have won or lost, the start data for them. And if I scroll across to the right, I've mashed up all the additional data, starting from here, which is our par.data. And finally, as I keep going across, all the various operator usage for that person, right? Whether they used filter example, join, or some sort of nominal conversion, and so forth. And if I switch back to the design perspective right here, I take that information, I do a little bit of ETL work here, where I replace some missing values, and I finally normalize the data before I put it inside this optimized selection operator. And this is where the magic happens. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run it, and then we're going to actually review it here while it's running. This is actually a sub-process. So if I double-click on it, let's just take a look at what's going on in here. Okay. Inside here, I have a cross-validation operator. I'm measuring the performance, and I'm actually doing some logging. And in just about a second or two, the population plotter will pop up. Okay. If I double-click on this sub-process over here, you'll see this is where the general linearized model is currently doing its work, testing and measuring the performance of the model. While this is all going on, I'll go back up one level, I'm actually logging all this information, which I can visualize in RapidMiner. So if I toggle over to my results here, you'll see that there's a log file here. And what RapidMiner is doing, there's our population, quick window here. Let's go to the data tab here. You can see here that RapidMiner is now evaluating the performance for the generations, which in this case I'm only using 100 because if you use 300 it takes a little bit longer. Not enough time for this demo. And you can see like what are the actual performances based on how many attributes you're using. So you can see here that the average amount of attributes or columns now are down to 153 and so forth. And if you sort this, you can kind of see what's happening based on every generation. And if you come over here and you highlight over this, you should be able to see the final generation as it's starting to separate the noise from the signal. And over time, you'll build a nice little Pareto curve that comes down over here. So while this is running, what's happening is after this does its work here, going through, in this case, 100 different generations, it's going to store the data in 2 points, or three buckets. It's going to store the actual data that we're going to, the final data set that we're going to use to train the final model on. And it's going to store the actual weights, which we saw before in the presentation, which are the ones that mattered, did matter. And finally, the ultimate performance. So while this is running, we can take a look at what the ultimate performance was. We'll take a look at our results tab, and we could see here that it's going to look something like this. While this is generating here. And it will also give us the number of attributes that it finally used. So you can see here we have our 77% accuracy, as well as our recalls and our precisions for this particular work. So I'm actually going to stop this process, and I'll show you the final process. Okay. Come over here back to design, and hit stop. And I'm going to open up the final one. And in this one is where we actually then see where the actual weights of the GLM that are affecting the process. Once again, let's just start the process here. I have a breakpoint. This is coming from the previous multi-objection feature process. And we could see here, once again, it looks very similar. But remember, we normalized, and we did a couple of other different things to it. And now we're only representing the columns that were selected. 4-day, 14-day, the deltas, the page views, and so forth, only the operators. And you can see up here, right up in here, we have 25 attributes, which is actually fantastic. And let's go back to design, and let's actually run it again. In this case, We'll double check here. We have a GLM, using this one again. Move up one level, and then run. And so what we'll do is we'll actually pump out the model itself for the GLM. You can see here all the different attributes that went into it. And finally, what are their coefficients? Which ones mattered? In this case, negative coefficients had a propensity for buying, and the positive ones were not for buying. And you can see here, once again, things like filling out forms, the biotech pharma industry, executing, a lot of operators measuring the performance and so forth all mattered. And interestingly enough, this was something that came out too, that regardless of the industry, except for one or two, the majority of them really didn't matter. It didn't really have an effect in the final model. And we looked at a lot of this industry data that came from our Pardot data or Salesforce. You can see over here, once again, these are the attributes that affect us negatively for purchasing, for buying. Things like polynomial regression and decision trees and so forth. So all this was actually quite exciting and quite revealing to all of us internally as well too. So